So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming back to campus for your reunion and for the other ways that you're engaged with our wonderful Duke community. My name is Ann Pelham. I'm from the class of 1974, and I have the privilege of serving as president of the Duke Alumni Association. And I hope you will all stay involved and connected with Duke and your fellow alums once you get back home. We volunteers and the wonderful DAA staff, led by Sterling Wilder, have been working to create new ways for alums to be active members of the Duke community. I'll tell you about a couple. The new Reader Project gives alums the chance to work one-on-one with a student, providing feedback on that student's paper, which is on a topic related to the alum's professional expertise. So it's a great marriage. Or Duke Alums Engage, which has been tested in 20 cities and will be rolled out everywhere with your help in May and April of 2011. The dates specifically are the April 23rd to May 1. And many new affinity groups have been created, such as DEMON, the Duke Entertainment Media and Arts Network. This group, self-identifies, so you don't have to be an actor or something to be part of it, will gather as part of an arts weekend next fall, October 29th and 30th. Among the goals is building connections among alums who are established in their careers, like these guys, young alums starting out, and also students trying to understand their possibilities. In fact, one of our panelists, the one in the middle, Jack Coleman, has been a key player in getting DEMON started in Los Angeles. Thank you, Jack. And I'm sure by the time we're done today, you will have both Dave and Kevin involved as well. So forgive me for this commercial interruption. Now on to our panel. We have two accomplished actors from the class of 1980 who have been friends for years, and as our interviewer, a highly regarded entertainment writer from the class of 1995. So if nothing else, they can talk about the different generations. How can it not be fun to listen to and look at these guys? The guy closest to me is Kevin Gray. He has made his career in musical theater, including roles on Broadway in Phantom of the Opera, both as Raoul and later as the Phantom, in The King and I, The Lion King, and many other productions. He's now touring the country with two other former Phantoms, and I'm looking forward to finding out how to come and listen to them because it must be a wonderful evening. Kevin lives in Connecticut and is somehow managing to teach a course at Rollins College in Florida, and I'm sure Dave will help him explain how he does that. Dave Karger, our interviewer, the class of 95, has been a writer at Entertainment Weekly ever since he graduated from Duke. He keeps rising up on the masthead because I check on him regularly. He is a pro in print as a blogger and on TV. He's a super expert on the Academy Awards. The blog is Oscar Watch, and he even picked Hurt Locker as the best picture, even though no one else was figuring that out. As for TV, Dave started out back in 2000 doing a modest Monday review of the weekend box office, and they just kept having more Dave and more Dave and more Dave. So you can watch for him on TV, on Today. He's also been a longtime member of the Duke Magazine editorial advisory board, so he has kept his Duke connections strong ever since he graduated. And Jack Coleman, that guy who helped us with DEMON in Los Angeles, is an actor and a screenwriter. He spent several years in the 1980s on Dynasty playing Steve Carrington. And most recently, according to some fans in the audience, he has become famous as Noah Bennett on Heroes, also known as the HRG, the guy with the horn-rimmed glasses, or the cheerleader's dad, which is how I like to think of it. He has also been a writer and producer and star of a small film, Studio City, which is, I think, a black comedy about a guy who owes a debt to the mafia. Maybe you guys can talk about that. And he's also involved in continuing work with screenwriting, and maybe we can find out more about that, too. And Dave promises he will get the stories of how their Duke experiences led to their careers as actors. Please join me in welcoming these wonderful panelists.
Thank you very much, Ann, and thank you to you all for being here. It's actually very funny to be doing this in this room because my junior year I ran Quadflix, which was the weekend movies, and I had to come up here twice a night and stand up on the stage and introduce the movie that we're playing, and I realized that was half my life ago that I did that, so I'm also feeling very old today. I want to start by asking you two a question that I get asked a lot, which is, if you knew you loved entertainment and the arts so much, why'd you go to Duke?
Wow. Hello.
The power.
The voice of James Earl Jones. I had no idea that I was going to end up an actor. But it was early on in my freshman year that I decided to do it. So, and you know what? It's funny because to a certain extent, while you certainly didn't get a conservatory education here, there was an element about being at Duke of professionalism, of competition, of reaching a certain level of expectation that I think was very helpful, even absent the conservatory education. So as time went on, and they brought in some professional directors from New York to do some of the productions, and I ended up going to the National Theater Institute my junior year at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Connecticut. So there was always an outside world that I was connected to, and I felt lucky to do that. And there were times I really kind of liked retreating from the theater world. Played JV basketball back in the day when I have a fellow teammate here, Danny Katz, played with me. And back in the day when they had JV basketball, they should really bring it back. So there were elements outside of the theater world, and rather than quit, which I thought about several times, and just moving to New York to seek my fame and fortune, I listened to the advice/veiled threats of my parents and stuck it out and graduated. And I'm really glad I did. I actually feel like I needed the time to go through college to grow up and be ready for the professional world.
What was your major?
I was a theater major. I was one of 6.
Wow.
But you were English and history, right?
History, English, yeah. History, top, English, second.
Okay.
History because I arrived with enough AP credits to make it look like it might be a path of least resistance. English because it was somehow connected, and I had some AP credits there too. The chance of at 18, self-determining that I would become an actor and choose a business with 92% unemployment, and the idea of expressing that to my retired Marine Corps father were exactly 0. So I came here pre-law. I'm fond of saying until I figured out law and acting were the same. But I really did discover it on a junior year abroad that's really what I wanted to do. And after years of fear and loathing and saying, oh my God, I finally sort of told my parents about it. And it was funny because my dad was like, well, I knew you were going to do that. I was like, we lived together. You couldn't tell me? I felt like I was in hell here. So, it was, he really wanted me, he was very big on liberal arts education, as I have remained. I'm a really big believer. I think that Jack mentioned conservatory. I think, for the very rare few that know exactly what they want to do. I mean, for you as a writer, would you have chosen, a sort of writing school? I don't think so. I mean, we wanted the full experience.
Right. Well, I come back every year and speak to the journalism students, and when I was here just 15 years ago, there were no journalism classes. So I'm curious to know, what do you guys remember as being the state of the arts programs, and the theater programs here at Duke? Did you feel lonely because there were just 6 majors, or did you kind of enjoy that?
Yeah, it was fairly lonely. It was kind of carving a path out of solid rock to a certain extent. But I think, it's funny because I think in a certain way it sharpened my focus. I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew this was not the place that was honing actors. But it wasn't hostile to me. It was just sort of bemused and somewhat indifferent. But they would, as I said, they provided directors coming in from New York. They told me about the National Theater Institute. John Clum, by the way, who was just recently retired, was very instrumental in this. And they also, they told us where the big auditions were, the big cattle call auditions for summer stock theater. So by the time I got out of Duke, I had several professional credits, which was important because you're going to be lying about your resume anyway, straight out of college. But
saying you can juggle and things like that.
Oh, well, that's the least of it.
Special skills.
It's like the Dos Equis commercial. He can speak Russian in French. So there were a lot of skills that didn't really exist, and a lot of things that I maybe did in class, which I maybe said was a professional credit. But you can weed out the lies more quickly when you have some bona fide credits, and that was important. And so I actually think it was quite Helpful, though, I think people who are here now who really want to do this as a career, I would love to see. I don't think much has changed, and I may be wrong. I know it's a department now. It's no longer just a program, but I think they said there were 15 majors. I think there's still a tremendous amount of trepidation for people to, sort of come out and admit that they want to be in the theater world, and I understand that, and it's with good reason, and especially parents who are spending a lot of money, or students who are accruing a lot of debt. It's a tough thing to say, yeah, I'm going to go into this 92% unemployed field. But on the other hand, I think that if to offer it as a major, it'd probably be very helpful to give it a little bit more of a conservatory feel, so that there is more hands on it. It's not just studying of the literature, and it's more about production and nuts and bolts.
It's a tough discussion. I don't know if you remember your curriculum, but
I don't remember anything I did.
I've been working at a school this year where it's a very ambitious. They call it liberal arts on steroids, and it's as close to a undergraduate conservatory as I think you could possibly create. And I sometimes wonder if there's a price for that balance of if you're at a liberal arts school. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but there are courses I think back on that shaped how I felt, the decisions I made, and what I experienced, not only as an actor, but just as a person, just trying things in English, in history, in psychology, anthropology, sociology, religion, just so many different things that, that happened that are very memorable to me that I would not have had if I had had to apply those hours to a specific training program. I just think I wasn't clear enough, and I maybe, certainly you were, others are, I just wasn't, so I think it would have really been difficult. Do you remember what the curriculum was like for you in terms of what was required for the major?
Yeah.
I was a long time ago. I had like breaking rocks and making the wheel and stuff like that. What did you have?
It was not as ambitious as some other majors, I think I would venture to say, which was all right with me at the time. I do remember working on some, for me, my major, because I knew I wanted to be an actor, we had some great productions of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and I played Guildenstern. It's a 3-hour play, and you're on stage talking the whole time. And I, just about flunked out of school to support that habit. But I, hung in there, got through, and so to me, a lot of my curriculum was production.
So yeah,
was on stage when we did Company and Marat Sade. I mean, that was my freshman year, and that was one of the things that kind of pushed me over into, I think I want to do this as a living, because again, there's a professional director from New York who came down. He brought in some local professional actors. It wasn't just students, and so there was a level of professionalism surrounding that production that was really inspiring to me. And I thought, I can hang. I can do this with these people, and I'm gonna, and it kind of crystallized my thinking. But the curriculum, to answer your question, clearly I don't remember. There were some, the most influential moments were productions.
It's hard. I mean, just doing productions requires resources. And by resources, I mean students, just sheer numbers, and hours of students' work, and hours of work backstage, on stage, and every other way, the design side, direction, lighting, so many aspects. There's just so much stretching you can do on that before you start to infringe upon other aspects of the school, and the school with its high academic attitude.
So in the midst of your pre-law studies, what was the extent of your onstage work as a Duke student?
Well, I was talking about this earlier. I had come out of high school as a singer, a choir, kind of, that was about that, which largely was also about fooling my father, and which is a theme, I think, in my life. And I did one show. I was a senior in high school. And I ran into a guy at a party, and he says, "Is there anything you didn't do before you graduate?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I never got to do a play." And we had a big theater department there, big time. My high school has 250 students in their drama program.
Wow.
They have a black box and a full stage, do 7 productions a year. It's big time. And so I did one show. They lost an actor. I did Jacques Brel's Alive and Well, Living in Paris, one part. I managed to sing the tenor role in that, a half-tone flat, the entire thing. I have a recording. And let me tell you, go try that. It's not easy. You have to really concentrate and work to go, yeah. It's really, which was good training for my later work with Jack when I was completely out of tune. So I was sitting freshman year in class. I've told this before, and a guy knocked on the door and said, "Do you want to be in the show I'm doing?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "I saw you in Jacques Brel. My girlfriend was in it, and that's how I saw you. I'm from Westport, Connecticut also. I'm doing the Fantastics. Do you want to be in it? And I was like, what's the Fantastics? I had no clue. I didn't know. My entire theatrical experience up to that point was framed around a chorus line. I just knew that that was running and that was a show, and that was my entire knowledge of theater. And when I did the show that Jack and I met on, which was Godspell, which is a show I did after the Fantastics, the musical director, Eve Goldfarb, and I, who became friends, we went up to New York. She said, it's time you learned about Stephen Sondheim. Okay. He's got a new show. So we drove up, and we got to a preview performance, a matinee of Sweeney Todd. Knew nothing about this. We walked in, we sat in the front row of the balcony, that whistle went off, and out came Len Carios, scariest performer. I mean, just extraordinary. You know, acting King Lear, singing, you know, theater, and I thought, that's what I want to do. But this is how clueless I was. Angela Lansbury came out, walked on the stage, and said, "Oh, a customer," and the show stopped for at least 3 minutes while the audience stood and applauded. And I know it was at least 3 minutes because I had time to pick up the playbill and read her 3-column bio because I didn't know who she was. That's how clueless I was. And by the time I got to the 4th Tony, I was like, oh, I guess that's important. And she whacked the thing and said, wait, what's your rush? What's there? And I was like, and I was hooked. That was it. I was absolutely hooked. And it's funny how you think back on these moments. I mean, I remember at the end of the show, I couldn't stand up. I couldn't breathe. I've only had that experience one other time. I saw Harold Pinter's The Homecoming.
That's the best musical production I've ever seen.
It was the best production. I was just stunned, and I just thought, who are these people and what are they doing? And it's a great blessing in my life that among that cast, fully 2/3 of them are friends of mine now, and my mentors, maybe as you know, among your early mentors, you were talking about John Forsythe earlier, who we just lost. The great gentlemen the two great men in my life in terms of that were certainly Hal Prince and Steve Sondheim, and Hal continues to be that. And, getting to fall into that I don't know where that next generation is. I have this horrible fear of what's going to happen when Steve and John Kander and Hal go because we don't really. But someone else will come forward.
Yeah,
we're still waiting a little
will.
bit, you know. We're just still waiting. So that's an extraordinary group of people.
So it's 1980. You guys are graduating. I know the next year you landed your regular spot on Days of Our Lives, right? That was 81. But even before that, what were the very first steps that you guys took after graduation to get this jump started for yourself?
Well, when I was at the National Theater Institute my junior year, went into New York a lot and auditioned for shows. And I auditioned for Danny Zuko in Grease. It was still on Broadway. And this was before it did all the ridiculous revivals of, you know, like Space Age Grease and stuff. This was still the original raunchy version. And I had probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 callbacks. They just kept calling me back and kept calling me back. And I didn't get it, and I'm glad I didn't get it, because I would have taken it and I would have not gone back to school, and I'm glad I came back and finished. But then when I went up to New York, it was just leaving Broadway and going out to Long Island, and I auditioned for it. So in my first 2 weeks in New York, I got Danny Zuko, was a member of Equity, and you know, I was kind of off and running, and I thought, all right, this is it. And then I did it for 6 months. And then I was like, unemployment for 6 months, and that was my first, you know, introduction into what the vagaries of the business. So, but at least right away I got into a production, and it was, you know, it was a well-oiled machine. It was too well-oiled because I was a sort of, you know, newbie, and there were all these guys who'd been doing it on Broadway, and I came into the lead, and there was a certain hazing element that went on for a while there, but then. So after unemployment for 6 months, I got hired to do a soap opera in L.A., out of New York. And I moved to Los Angeles. I had never been to California. I did not know a single person in California. And I just moved there because I got hired. And that's you know, when you're 22, 23 years old, being a gypsy is just, it's okay because it's exciting. Yeah. When you're in your 40s and your 50s, it's like, you want to move to Toronto? No, you move to Toronto.
What about you, Kevin?
I'm still moving to Toronto.
He's working in Florida, living in Connecticut.
Actually, it's interesting because, joking aside, I mean, Jack and I and a very small number of other people from that period have been friends for 30 years now. And Jack was very important because he was so clear and focused, and because his skill level was much higher than mine. And at the time, also, the world was a little different. There were more people that looked like Jack being cast than people who looked like me, which is, you know, a sort of another story. And I was nervous that if I went, I knew I wasn't ready. And Jack felt very ready, and he obviously was. and well, I remember you and I talked about this. You got to go to New York or L.A. And I was like, if I go to New York and I bomb, my father will kill me. If I go to L.A. and bomb, I'll kill myself because you figure you've missed your moment. So for some reason, one of our other friends had gone to Boston to go to grad school, and I thought, well, that seemed like a safe sort of,
neutral zone.
Why you would think that, I don't know. It's not exactly a theater town in a sense, but so I went to Boston and got an apartment with a buddy of mine who was in vet school, and I got my first job waiting tables. I bounced a check to get the little uniform, and the second night I was there, I dumped an entire tray of beef stroganoff on the owner's wife. These are the sort of seminal moments that happen in a career. And as I was being fired and walking home with my little jacket, which I bounced the check for, I thought, what am I going to do? And I passed this building across from the Opera House there. It was called Horticultural Hall. And there used to be a company there called the Boston Shakespeare Company. And I kind of looked at it. And the next morning I came over and I walked by and I just walked in. And I was trying, it was all the nerve I could muster. And I walked in and I said, are you having any auditions? It just so happened, and here's where how small the world is, the artistic director of that theater company was Bill Kane, who would write a play that would be very instrumental in Jack's career and who's remained a friend and who's obviously had another interesting year this year. He remains an important writer. Bill was a Jesuit priest who had taken over this company and was starting his career. In that company in Boston were Henry Warnitz, who ran Ashland, and Tony Goldwyn, and a bunch of others. It was a wonderful young company, a bunch of people from Trinity Rep. And it was a rotating rep company, so we learned 5 shows at once. It was the Scottish play, and Tartuffe, and Richard III, and All's Well That Ends Well. And The Tempest. So it was a great season. So we rehearsed them all, and then did them all a different one every night on a unit set, which was about as cool training as you could have, even if you were as clueless as I was. But they have, it's 2 ingenues, and ingenue and juvenile, and 2 leading ladies, and 2 leading men, and the character people, and it's all laid out for the season. And there was one guy they brought over from Australia. I don't know what ever happened to him. And he was a young guy. He'd made like 2 films in Australia, and he was obviously the next big thing, the new black or whatever, and he kind of thought he was. And after about 2 months of working with him, Bill had just about had enough, I think, and so had the rest of the company. And at the height of one of their moments of stress, I walked in and said, are you having any auditions? And it was just one of those sort of Ziegfeld moments. It was like, you, monologue, classical, contemporary, sing, you're hired. What? And so I got a job with them for like $50 a week. And I, went to school shows, and I was on the main stage. And at the end of the year, when they fired this guy, I took over for him on 2 days' notice as Bertram in Oswald, which is not only a really huge part, but an almost unplayable part. I remember learning that role in a day. I could never do that now, but it was like the Russian woman lifting the car off the baby, the adrenaline. And that was the beginning. And what I learned by the end of that year was that I really wasn't ready. So that's when I went to New York and started to really study. And at the end of that 2-year period is when Pacific Orchestra happened. That's kind of the journey for me. So Jack's success was actually instrumental in my sort of calibrating what would be a comfortable place for me to be. And I'm glad I made that journey and that trip, and that allowed me to sort of do some of the, I did that in the summer of stock, which kind of helped me catch up a little bit to what you had already done during school. I'd done a little bit during school, but not quite as much. So that it does help just to good, bad, or indifferent, just to ply your trade a little bit, say a little bit.
I think anyone who's done a junior high or high school production, musical theater, straight plays, probably has had the nightmare that you're on stage and you don't know what to say, or you're on stage, you forget your lines. I certainly have had that nightmare, and I haven't done a play since I was in high school. How often do you guys have that dream?
I used to have it a lot more than I do now, but I had that happen in real life. I did a Off-Broadway show in New York called The Common Pursuit, Simon Gray play, and I had to learn it. It wasn't a day or two. It was about 10 days, I think, to learn the line. But the character's off stage for a long time, and then comes on stage and spews forth 4 or 5 pages of almost monologue, and and British, and it's Cambridge British, so it's not Cockney, which is a lot easier for Americans to do. And so anyway, I halfway into it, and it's just like a test pattern. I just it's awfully quiet, and it's like.
Do you say line, or what do you do?
Well, I think what I did was I sort of fumbled around the stage for a while until some semblance of the lines came back to me, and I got through it, and then I ended up doing the rest of that performance fine. But the next night, the second night going out, with the memory of the night before, that's the most nervous I think I've ever been in my life, because I thought, I'm just going to go out there and go sky high, and I'm not going to be able to recover, and nobody's going to cover for me. And when you have to learn a part very quickly and not organically with everybody else, because you're being plugged into, what understudies do, for instance, is just, it's so nerve-wracking. So that was my. Was it Christopher Durang play, The Actor's Nightmare?
Yeah,
Christopher
exactly.
Durang?
That's right. Yeah.
Do you know the play? It's a fantastic play. A guy just shows up off the street and he gets pushed. They think he's this. They think he just gets shoved into this thing. And the play, and just as he starts figuring out what the play is, they change the play.
Oh,
and now all of a sudden, and it's a very, very funny play.
So how many uneventful performances of this show did it take for you to not be a nervous wreck?
About 2 weeks. About 2 weeks, and then you start feeling like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And I'll be okay. And you start finding something like in your mind, you go, if I break down and I lose it, here's where I'm going to jump to. So you have kind of a fail-safe in the back of your mind. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to pull out the map and whatever it was. But
what about a nightmare experience with an orchestra? Or,
Well, I was just thinking about what you said. I know I'm going to jump there, and what you hear, of course, is first of all, you see the actor with you going, I'm sorry, what? You're jumping to what page?
Yeah.
They're mentally.
Yeah.
And then you hear the sound guy in the back going.
The only way you can get away with it is if it's a monologue, is if you're not affecting anybody else. Because if you just jump there and everyone else is going.
It's act for your life.
They get that deer in the headlights.
I like what the British call it. They call it. We call it going up. They say in actresses, I went up, but in England they say I dried. And that's what it feels like there's just the fluid in your brain is just gone.
It is the worst feeling.
It's happened to me in two different ways with regularity. One is on a long run, a very long run, where you've done a show 400, 600, 1,000 times. There will be a spot, and you know it's coming. A show you know inside and out, and all of a sudden you go, and your mind just says, it's just like that senior moment where you're going, what was that? This song with that. The problem is there's a show going on. The conductor's going.
Oh, right.
You just, and then you're dry. So, and as Jack says, the worst part is that one sort of has a foreshadowing, and then it happens. It re-triggers.
It's self-fulfilling at this point.
It's like you don't know this section of if ever I would leave you. Like, how many seasons are there? It's got to be summer, winter, or fall. You've forgotten which one. And you do these horrible things. You go to the stage manager's desk and you go, quick, let me look at your thing. First of all, you can't touch their book. They're in process. But also, they think you're insane.
Guess you've been doing it for 6 months.
Yes, it upsets people when you've been doing a show for a year and you suddenly don't know your lines and you're the lead. It's just sort of disruptive.
I got to tell you, though, even in shooting film, when you're doing, often you'll do a scene, and especially if there's a lot of dialogue or if it's an emotional scene, and you sort of do it, and maybe you do your coverage first, and as you probably all know, you can often do a scene many, many, many times from many different angles, different camera lenses, all kinds of different things happen, and so you have to, almost any scene that you shoot on film is going to take many takes. Sometimes, and it's a mini version of this as the scene goes on, rather than becoming more familiar with the lines start to go. Because you've done them too many times, and it's like you go to lunch and you come back and you've got like half a page monologue, and you go dry, and it's because with film dialogue it's obviously much thinner, but there's an emotional intention which when you first start shooting it, you're just playing the intention and you're just going, and then after a while what you're doing is you're matching, and then you're imitating, and then you're mimicking. And then you're lost.
It's less organic that way, isn't it?
It can become completely inorganic.
Is it compounded by the fact that, on a huge NBC hour-long drama, time is money?
Ooh.
And you've got so many people around you, crew members, not to mention everyone back at the network and at the studio. And does that kind of eat away at your head, too? And you're thinking, oh, my God, I'm not getting this.
It particularly eats away at you, and this is the insidious thing about show business in general, but the hierarchy in television or movie is if you're number one on the call sheet and the show is based around you, there's a lot more leeway to have little mishaps. If you're number 14 on the call sheet and the show is not based around you, and maybe you're not a series regular, and maybe worst of all you're a day player, because I've done all of that. I've been number one, I've been number 20, and when you're number one, there's a lot more room for margin for error. When you're number 20, you come in, you don't know your lines, or you drop something, or you say, there's very little patience for that. So doing guest stars, next time you watch a television show, and you watch someone who's just guest starring on it, someone who's coming in on House, and they've got some weird medical condition, and they confront Dr. House about, you're not treating my father right. Pity that person. That is in television, that's the most difficult thing for an actor to do, is to be plugged into something. You don't work there all the time. They don't know your name. They don't want to know your name. You get in there, you do it, you go home. And that's a tough one. That's the toughest part.
One thing that you guys have in common, which is very common in musical theater, is that both of you, or several of your best-known roles, or in your case, one of your best-known roles, was a role that was already established by a different actor. For you, it was Dynasty, Stephen Carrington on Dynasty. For you, it's Phantom, or Yul Brynner, The King and I, or whatever.
Who's this Yul Brynner?
What different challenges does that bring into the picture when that's something that you're doing either on stage or on TV?
Well, I don't know what it's like for Jack to replace Al Corley, who I think people have to sort of think back through the bibliography to think that it wasn't Jack's. But when there are a handful of roles in the theater, and there's some great roles that I think of Lee J. Cobb in Death of a Salesman, and even people now they don't think of him indelibly, even though he was that created that. But you get to Rex Harrison in My Fair Lady, Yul Brynner in The King and I, these kind of roles, Richard Kiley in La Mancha. These are indelible performances. Barbra Streisand, and so there's a mythology issue, no question. And it's quite daunting to try to break through that. I remember Frank Langella telling me when he was doing Dracula that when they started rehearsing, his first line was only 2 words. The words good, followed by the word evening. It took him 4 weeks of rehearsal before he could say good evening without going, good evening. He said it was impossible. He said no matter what he said, it was like blah blah blah. And he said it he was wrecked for days. And then once he finally was able to find that in his own voice with my favorite word was some authenticity, he was free. But until that moment, and I felt that way on King and I felt like I was on sort of this end of a 20-foot long, 1/4-inch piece of copper pipe, and they were going, just go through there and you'll be fine. And you're looking at it and you're looking at it, and it's not possible. You're just not, and you're sort of thinking of it's sort of like The Godfather, Don't use all your powers, all your gifts. You're just thinking, please, get me through this. And then one day, you start to go through the tube. When I was working on the show, I had a young man in the cast who was Thai, and I asked him if he would help me go through the piece. And this is, again, where I think my Duke student sort of came out, wasn't required, but I said, I'd like to go through this show in every syllable for correct Thai dialect, and then I'll go away from it. And the thing that was interesting is one of the first things that came back, he said, well, in Thai, the dialect goes up. So it would always be et cetera, not et cetera. So there was no et cetera, et cetera. So I rehearsed with all of my inflections up. So, and of course, that was not the way our ears were used to hearing it, so I felt free. And I was very free and feeling really confident until Mary Rogers, Richard's daughter, came to the show and said, no. My father wrote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that's how you'll sing it. It was like, but in my mind, I had broken from some of the sort of, people say that all the time. How did you get away from that sort of, where do you think that came from, all this sort of, and I said, well, if you want to know the truth, when you put on the costumes for the King of Siam, if you were doing traditional costuming, there is a very specific cut and weight to the cloth of what you are wearing. And it's heavy because it's royal. This man is a deity in his own country. He's a god. And everything is cut with this, that doesn't have shoulders. So everything's always kind of sliding off of you if you've ever worn something that didn't have shape. And so you have 2 choices. You can either kind of roll your shoulders and stand like this, or you can stand like this and hold the jacket. And you can't help it. And every time I watched it, I thought, well, what makes such a big deal? He's just holding the jacket, It's like Phantom of the Opera. There was that moment where he does this, and everyone thought, oh, what is that? And I'll tell you what it was. The first time Michael Crawford did the show, when he took his hat off and threw it, his wig went like this, and the hair stood up. And one of the designers said, make sure you flatten your hair. So what was this for an actor? One moment became you know, and then everybody had to try to do it, you know, until Halpern said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that? Don't do that." But that's how these things begin. You know, there's a famous opera roll where in the middle of the aria, the tenor stands, he turns upstage, he walks upstage to the back of the audience, and he returns and he sings. And that's because when the show was originally done, when the piece was done, the tenor came down, he started to sing, he had the horrible question of, "Is my fly open?" He turned upstage, he went upstairs, he said, "I was right," fixed, turned, came down, "Ah!" And it stayed in for like 100 years, like that blocking. So it's not always as logical as all that.
Do you have to check your fly, though, when you go back every time?
I just do it all the time anyway.
Yeah.
I just, you know.
It made me a little nervous right now, actually.
Don't look, don't think about
And by the way, you can freely admit to this crowd that you were watching Dynasty every week and memorizing it, even when you were not on it, so that when you started, you were just ready to go.
If it's important to you, I will say that. I had never seen it. I had actually never seen it. And now, you know, replacing Yul Brynner, I mean, doing that's such an iconic issue to try to get over. I was not replacing Yul Brynner. The biggest problem I had was Al Corley had curly hair, and I had very straight hair. So that's 45 minutes of having my hair curled every day.
God.
That was because I wasn't worried about trying to be what he was doing. I don't know, it's funny, and you know, it happens in television a lot where people go away and someone comes in. It used to happen, there's a big tradition in soap opera where someone would go away and another actor would come in. But that's a very different thing on a show like that.
The question that I'm sure you've gotten 50,000 times, in 1982, did you have a manager or an agent saying to you, "It's a gay role, I don't think you should do it, it's untested"?
No, I didn't have anybody warning me, and it wouldn't have done any good because I wasn't worried about it. And it's like, okay, do you want to continue to be unemployed, or do you want to be on this show which is taking off like a rocket ship? So I chose employment, oddly enough. And it was a very tame time in network television. Had it been, you go from no gay character ever on television to Queer as Folk, that might have given me pause. Mm-hmm. That would have given me pause. I'll say it right now. But that's just not what,
I think you're being humble about it. I just remember the time being more, it was pretty challenging. I thought you handled that with a lot of aplomb. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of talk. There was a lot of, things written about it. A lot has happened in the world, thankfully, since then. But I think, I don't know, I thought you handled it really well, and it wasn't, I think it's easy to look back on it now. But,
well, my standard question was, because people used to ask all the time, so, are you really gay? And rather than, sometimes I would just say, man, I'm as gay as they get. And just take it, or just say, if you say no, you sound defensive. So MASH was on the air at the time, and I'd say, I don't know, is Alan Alda a surgeon in the Korean War? That was my stock. That was my stock answer, because you can't say, if you go, no, God, no, then there's no retreating from it, and this doesn't do you any good to be, overly aggressive about it. So, you develop these stock answers over time. I give you my hero stock answer. Ready for my hero stock answer? Which, if anybody who's been fans of the show may have heard before. Guess what question we've been asked more than any other question? I'll give you one guess, and if you don't get it, I won't torture you.
Do you know what's going to happen?
Well, no, that's right up there. But it's.
I was pretty good.
That is, yeah. But it's, if you had a superpower.
What would it be? What would you choose?
Yeah. And over the course of 4 or 5 years, you can imagine how that would get a little tiring. So my stock answer there was, well, I used to think it'd be really cool to be invisible. But then I was invisible for most of the 90s, and it wasn't that great. So you
Morris.
Got to have a, so you got to have a stock answer.
I see. I'm curious, Kevin, you've done so many kind of seminal shows, and there's certain roles, I guess really probably King of Siam and The Phantom, that you're really, really well known for. How does it work? Do you find that producers for these productions come to you and say, we think you'd be really good for The Phantom? Or are you kind of in the back of your mind saying, I want to be The Phantom. How can I make this happen? How do the shows and you find each other?
That's a great question. Phantom was unusual because I was so much younger than the person I replaced. That's kind of unusual. And I credit Hal Prince with that because I had auditioned for Hal, and he just said, I love your voice, you're just too young for everything I'm doing. So, but he loves actors, and I think he sort of had an idea that there was some chemistry that he thought he liked, and as it worked out, I ended up doing 4 shows for him, and so there is someone I just love working with. But I think with regard to Phantom, I just felt like I really understood that character really deeply, perhaps because of my background. It's funny, thinking back on it. And when I was first in the business, people said you could never talk about your background because people will try to type you. I'm like, well, guess what? I'm Chinese, Russian, and Jewish. So type away. There's just no place to put you. And so as soon as people know, they say, oh, well, now, of course, I see the Russian, Chinese, Jew in you. Come on. I used to talk about stock answers. People would say, well, what's your background? I would say, well, I'm half German Shepherd, half Cocker Spaniel. And then they would sort of leave it, because then they'd go, oh, yeah, I kind of see the Cocker Spaniel.
Do you have a lot of skin problems?
I didn't steer it, but I was in Phantom what I thought was a long time. I think I did that 1,250 times.
That is a long time.
Yeah, and I almost figured it out by the end. Actually, I never sort of figured it out. And
did you ever lose the lines or the songs on that one?
Probably. I'm trying to remember specifically. Yes, I used to. There was one spot in the Past the Point of No Return, the opera, that one day I just drew one of those 3-week blanks, and I had to write the thing on my mirror and say it before I was going on. It was just ridiculous, and I was at 800-900 shows in.
No, it's not ridiculous.
But
repetition will make you forget.
Well, that's yeah. I had auditioned for Saigon for one of the roles and been cast, and then they changed their mind, which is really unusual, because they cast another actor that was slight, and they thought I was too tall to play the villain in that. And so when years later, I was doing Phantom, and out of the blue, I got this phone call. Brief digression to give you an idea of how smooth the road goes with success. Okay, I was in Phantom on Broadway. And I was asked to go on the road and open the national tour, which was starting, and we were opening the Broward Center, beautiful $63 million theater, which we did. The reviews there said Kevin Gray is Michael Crawford, Joan Crawford, Broderick Crawford, Shag Crawford. They were great. We went to Washington. We're in previews there. And I come off stage, and when you're the Phantom, you're covered with what looks like a pepperoni pizza. And so you go into a room, and they take the stuff off. It takes about 45 minutes to put it on. It takes quite a while to get all the junk off, too. So I was going, they always have a little sort of room, their makeup room, and you go in there, and there's a makeup artist that helps you get all the stuff off. And when I went there, I saw standing in front of the room the musical supervisor for Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron McIntosh and the production supervisor, both of whom were friends and colleagues and people I admired a lot, and they looked like somebody's dog had died. So I walked over and I said, wow, guys, what's going on? Who got fired? Oh, God, it's me. And they said, yeah, it is. And I thought, what happened? They said, come in. So they opened the door to the room. My makeup artist took one look at them and went, yee, and ran out. They closed the door. They said, it's our fault. Cameron McIntosh has always been very uncomfortable with this show because he co-produces this with Andrew, and they have very different styles. And Cameron doesn't like watching the show, and he usually paces back and forth in the bar. We thought it'd be a good idea. It's the Kennedy Center. The president is coming. We put him in the 6th row center. And he was crawling up the seat. And by the end of the first act, he wanted everyone out. He just was, he freaked out. And so I said, well, what happens? And they said, well, you're done. And I said, we open tomorrow. Do I open the show? Or you bring? What happens? And they said, you'll open the show tomorrow, and then you'll go home. So I came in the next night. I opened the show at the Kennedy Center in front of the president, the vice president, the prime minister of England, and my mother and father, and Charles, others. And I went to the opening night party, which was $1.5 million party with all of the Teddy Kennedy and Alan Simpson and Al Gore and Alan Tipper and all these people. And there was a production table with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron and Hal and all these people, and they didn't even look at me. They wouldn't look at me. And so the next day I woke up and I thought, well, now what happens? And the time ticked by, and it was the afternoon, and I thought, I haven't heard anything. I don't really know how this goes. No one said anything to me. So I went to the theater. And I looked around, and there's a sign-in sheet, and I looked down the list, and my name was on it. So I signed in. I went to the makeup room. And Janice kind of looked at me, and I said, how you doing? And she said, good. And we sat there for a minute, and no one said anything, so she put the makeup on. I put the costume on, and I went and did the show. And I went home. Next day I came in, looked on the list, names on the list, signed in, did the show. For a year and 3/4. Every day I came in. And one day the company manager came in and said, do you know that you don't have a contract? And I said, uh-huh. He said, do you want one? I said, no.
Were the payments on time?
They paid me on time. They gave me a raise after 6 months. I continued in that job for almost 2 years without a contract, without anyone ever. Finally, after 2 years, I said, is this over? Has this blown over? Are we like, what happened here? It was like a David Mamet play. Are we speaking or are we just talking? It was surreal. It was surreal. And everyone
They never explained it.
No one explained it. Nothing ever said. I just continued. And then one day, out of the blue, after 2.5 years, the phone rings, and it's Cameron. And he's my new best friend. I need you in Toronto tomorrow. You're not producing the show in Toronto. You're doing Saigon. What? We've lost. We've had to let someone go. I thought, I know how that goes, right?
But this time it's stuck.
Yeah, you're coming here. Do you need the script? I said, it won't get here before I'll get there. I got on a plane. I left my fiance in tears, and I went to Toronto.
I like how firing that doesn't stick.
And I
Someone forgot to really fire him. You only sort of fired him.
Well,
you're fired.
What's interesting is Cameron then had this history with that role of getting very nervous about the engineers in Saigon, the Jonathan Price role. And so he would do this, come right down to the end, and then panic and call me. So he'd say, I need you in Australia. I need you in Germany. And I would
he
go
must have
through
just like the chutzpah of showing up the next day.
What was weird is I would go through
son of a gun.
What was on the other side of that. I mean, I'd already been through it. So I would sit back and go, he's not going to stop me. He'll be all right. And I would get my passport and I'd get my shots and I would sit there.
I had a great experience
over, right?
with him on doing Miss Saigon in L.A. at the Dorothy Chandler? Anyway. Amundsen. Gigantic theater. Anyway, he was... So, from Kevin's early stories of how nervous he was as a young actor and to what became of him later, where I'm talking to him on the phone. He's at the theater. I'm talking to him on the phone, and he goes, is Beth there? Yeah, I want to talk to Beth. So Beth's my wife. He gets on the phone. He starts talking to Beth. They're talking for a while, and all of a sudden she just goes, I said, what happened? He goes, oh, yeah, he hung up on me. He was late for his cue.
Had to go.
He said, okay. I was like,
I hear the helicopter.
Oh, my God, that's my... He's like... throws the phone down, runs on stage, and does American Dream, which is the biggest number in the entire show.
You do get kind of grooved, but I did, like I said, I ended up working for Cameron for 6 years. But at the end of that, I went to Titanic. I remember then we got cell phones. This is where it got really bad. I was in Chicago doing. I shouldn't tell this story, especially with young actors and all. And we were just first experiencing cell phones and the magic of walking around and being able to talk to people. So I'm talking to my agent in L.A. And I'm talking to him, and I'm walking around backstage to the Opera House, and I'm talking, and we get to the end of the first act, and it was kind of going on, and I said, hang on, no, just hang on 1 second, hang on, put the phone in my pocket. And I went out on stage, sail on, great ship. I sang through the last number, and it's a long number, went on for 6-7 minutes, and then I walked up the other side, and you heard applause, and I said, are you still there? And he said, there was a pause, and then I heard my agent say, somehow I think Actors' Equity would frown upon it. You're probably right.
Wasn't there feedback or something that got into the PAs? Didn't somebody's phone call end up on the PA?
Oh, I'm sure it happened somewhere. They have we only have this certain number of bands, and there's all kinds of stuff. We used to get all kinds of things happen on Broadway. People would be singing. A friend of mine was singing.
Oh, I remember hearing a police dispatch one time at a Broadway show.
We used to get the cab guys. Habibi, pick up on 33rd. So at the French Opera House, a friend of mine was doing Les Mis. He was singing, "Bring him home," and it's Delta 573. The worst possible.
Oh my God! I have a good nightmare story, which is I overslept for a live appearance on the Today Show once.
Oh, but that's got to be easy to do. It's early, right?
But and it was in L.A., so it was a 5:30 a.m. It was supposed to be, and I wasn't there. But
oh my!
Yeah, and you really overslept. You weren't just late. You just
I had two spots to do on the same show, and one was at 7:45, so that was 4:45 a.m., and the other one was at 9, which was 6 a.m. And I overslept for the first one and made it to the second one. The second one was the more important of the two, but Katie Couric was like, "Where's Dave?" And that's
Did you come
the
up
nightmare.
with a story? Did you?
No, I mean
nobody died.
They knew they had to wake me up in the hotel room because I wasn't in the car that was sitting outside the hotel.
They put a copy of the magazine on a chair.
I know, that would have been a great idea. They should have thought of that.
A discreet location. the bunker.
But the story that you tell about the Phantom experience, you kind of had the opposite experience. I didn't know until recently, talking to a colleague of mine who's covered Heroes for so long. With Heroes, because I was recently watching the pilot, and your credit, you don't have your own card. It's your name with someone else's. Yeah. And as I understand it, it's a situation similar to like Juliana Margulies on ER, where it was supposed to be just a limited time thing, but the character was so beloved that it became a regular lead role.
Well, it was like 5 lines in the pilot, and I think they envisioned it possibly recurring. But I wasn't the series regular until episode 11. But it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because I tell this story all the time, and I mean it completely sincerely. Had they envisioned it as a series regular, and I'd had to jump through all the hoops that you have to go through to get series roles of testing at the network, at the studio and then at the network, it's very, very slim chance I would have gotten the part, because there's just so many ways to lose a job in a network situation where one person there just goes, yeah, I remember him as Stephen Carrington on Dynasty with the bleached blonde hair, and I don't think this is him. This guy's supposed to be scary, and I don't think this is him. So, and that's all it takes. But when it starts as a very small part, the good thing was I was savvy enough to look at it on the page and go, this thing could be great. I don't have any idea what's going to happen, but the fact that he turns out to be the cheerleader's father, after all this stuff where you see him just sort of slinking around and you never really see his face, and there's shots through the glasses, and you just thought it could be a really cool character. And then, after the pilot, I got a call from my agent saying, okay, you're in the first 5 episodes. And I was like, yes. So by episode 8, the writing was on the wall, and they kept writing for me more and more, and I knew they were going to, they called me, Dennis Hammer called me and said, we're working on your contract. That's our number 1 priority. And that's like, that was on the way to an audition. Talk about an experience that removes all weight from an audition. I was like, I did not care if I burst into flames in that audition. It just didn't matter.
And in the 4th season run of the show, the episode that is widely considered the best of the whole run is yours, The Company Man. And here's a show that for the first 10, 11, 12 episodes was really so ensemble-based. It rarely kind of stayed on one character for scene after scene, and then here's an entire episode built around HRG.
Yeah. No, that was... It's funny because they had planned to do it earlier, and then they decided to wait, and it was a great idea that they decided to wait, because by the time they did it, there was really enough of this character built up, and you just didn't know whether he was good or bad and what his intentions were, so they saved it. But that was, I don't... That may be already a bygone era. This was 1 episode, network television, 43 minutes. They spent, $6 or $7 million on it. It was 15 days of production. To give you an idea, the average 1-hour drama is shot normally in about 8 days, 8 shooting days, and this was double that. So it's so much time and so much money that I don't even think that they will do that anymore. I think the networks are just so cost conscious now. I know that NBC just spent something like $12 million on The Event, which is a huge pilot. But in terms of what they will spend per episode and how many days they will take to do it. And of course, my first day of work was the morning after the Golden Globes. So we had been at the Golden Globes all night. I didn't sleep through it. I had a 4:30 appearance with Al Roker at 4:30, and then I had a 3-page scene in Japanese. The first day of that episode, and I shot it from 8 a.m. until about 4 p.m. and then I had another scene after that. But I just remember at the end of that scene, calling my wife and just going, this is day 1. I knew it was 15, and I was in every scene, and it was a 15-day episode. And I just thought, I don't know if I'm going to get through this. This is such a killer already. But, I'd had 2 hours of sleep, and I'd spent the last 8 hours speaking Japanese. Right. And I just thought, I just don't know if my brain might explode. But it was, it was a great time. It was the sort of the salad days of the show, because it was such a big hit right out of the box, they were willing to spend that kind of money and take that kind of time.
And that's around the time you were on the cover of...
The cover of Entertainment Weekly.
Which is very cool. So you alluded to the joke about being invisible for the 90s. For both of you,
He was working every night.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But was there ever a moment, and if so, what was it, where you came the closest to thinking, I'm packing it up?
Many times.
Yesterday afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, many times. It's the tide comes in, the tide goes out. It's tough. It's not. It's sort of a version of that Betty Davis, getting older is not for sissies. It's like show business is some serious, It's the rewards are great, and I think Sam Watterson said it's a great career and a terrible business. It's just tough. We're very disposable, and we're in as the information age changes and the compression of celebrity continues, as well. Trying to keep the interest of whatever our media focus is, or the venue. How do we sell more ads? How do we hold on? It just gets tougher and tougher to have any kind of longevity. It really is remarkable.
Well, and also, especially in television and film, but especially in television, the ageism is real. I mean, something like 70% of all primetime parts go to actors under 35. So I'm just barely over that. But because I am, I mean, it's just the opportunities. And if you're a woman over the age of 40, I mean, my agency in LA is a small boutique agency. They've got great actors. It's not a big, powerful agency, but it's a very well-respected agency. I just had lunch with a couple of my agents, women, the other day, and they were saying that they've got all of their women who are like 40 and above are, they said not only are they not working, they can't get auditions. And every one of them, some of them are Emmy winners, they all have like really impressive resumes. These aren't, dilettantes. These aren't people who just said, maybe I'll try this while my husband's working. These are real, and it's just brutal.
It happens sort of, I think, you know it's coming, but you don't know when. And then one day you are Mr. Cellophane. I mean, it's really strange that it happens. I remember being in L.A. and a friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm taking an acting class." I said, "With who?" He said, "With Rod Steiger." I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "Yeah, he's teaching a class." So we went, and Steiger told the story. I'll never forget it. He said, "I went to this audition, and my agent called and said, oh, there's this young director, and he's a big fan of yours, and he wants to see you for this role in a movie." And Steiger said, "Great." So he said, "Would you mind going to the meeting? You're sort of beyond that, delicate actor ego thing." He said, No, I'll go. I want you." So he goes and he meets, and the director's like, "Oh, Mr. Steiger, I'm a huge fan of yours. I love your work. I know everything you've ever done, and I just have, I know you really haven't had a chance to read the script, but I think you're perfect for this. I just have one question for you. Can you do a Southern accent?"
Oh.
And Steiger said,
"Did you see?"
Shall I, you have that moment of, shall I take out my copy of In the Still of the Night for you? I mean, and and the Oscar that goes with it. And he said, he tried to be gracious, and he just said, "Well, yes, I can." And I said, "Well, that's great. And he knew when he walked out he was never going to hear from them again. And he went home and he said to his wife, "I got to get a job. These people don't know who I am. They honestly, this generation does not know who I am." And we all go through that period, and it sort of happens oddly, and you have to just, that's why you just have to, I think you have to somehow have this desperate child in you that needs to play, that needs to do this. I think there's that sort of desperation, and then there's this other side where people and without embarrassing them, people and love break through in their own work. I've had 3 experiences of that in my life where I saw someone whose work was I was just so unbelievably happy to see them succeed and to break through. One was actually a classmate of ours from the year before, Charles Randolph Wright, if you know his work, when his play Blue went to Broadway and I went to see it. It was such a great play, and it was so beautifully brought to life. And I just thought, wow, this is that rare moment you can actually go to somebody after a show and go, "I loved it, and I'm happy for you." And I have no agenda with it except to be happy. And that's how I felt about Jack's work when I saw Heroes. I thought, not only did I know this was an opportunity at a time in our lives when they're not falling off trees, but it was just what you did with it. And it's just so great to just be that genuinely happy. I think the other person would be Kevin Sack when he won the Pulitzer Prize, who writes for the Times. Just, and I'll feel that way when you're too.
Yeah, right.
No, seriously, it's like it's just cool to get to that, because when you're younger, you don't feel that way completely.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, but there's that wonderful release of wow. That's just so cool for them, and I just
that's the only good thing. And we'll stop talking about aging because it's making my back hurt.
What? What? 4 o'clock.
It's just that you stop. After a while, you that kind of competitive thing with your colleagues kind of goes away, and I've noticed it. I've been on the receiving end of it as well, where you stop competing on that. Where it's not enough for you to succeed; they need to fail, and you stop doing that. You start rooting for people. And you see them do good work, and someone's stuck around for years and years and years. And look, it was a friend of mine said years ago, there's very little nobility in this business. 95% of what is made is not particularly good. And so if you get something that is good or that's fun or that's entertaining, and you get to see people who are good in doing it, it actually becomes kind of gratifying after a while. Just to know that somebody stuck it out long enough to get in there and really do good work.
We have 2 mics here in the aisle, so if there are people who have questions or...
Are you all awake still?
So
anybody need a coffee?
So please feel free to approach the mics, and while you are thinking of your questions and approaching the mics, I'll ask another. Both of you, in addition to performing, are also writing different projects. You've written screenplays. You and your wife have written musicals. Is that something that is kind of like what you hear about the Matt Damon, Ben Affleck story? They had to write because they weren't happy with what they were getting. Is it a necessity thing, or have you always been interested in writing as much as you've been interested in performing?
I haven't always been as interested in writing as I was in performing, but after a while, 2 things happen. One is that if you have a lot of downtime, you start thinking, all right, what am I going to do? And then you go, you know what, I'm going to create something. And then the other thing is also personally is that it was, I think, fairly far along before I felt like I really actually had a writing voice. And I started writing this thing, and it was kind of standard fare, sort of sitcom kind of thing. And then over the course of about a year, it became a lot more than that, and it grew into something which I'm really proud of. And we shot it on high def, and we did it in 4 days, and we got together a really good group of actors, and we shot at Tess Harper's house, so Academy Award nominee Tess Harper, and she was in it, and we rehearsed it so that because it was very dialogue heavy and it was very snappy dialogue, and we knocked it out, and we had to do it in 4 days, and it was and it gave everybody involved in it got to do something beyond what they when you have an Academy Award nominee say to you, you actually made me interested in my acting career again. Amazing. I mean, that's great. So that was that, and I think that it developed I think my writing voice developed late, and partly because I wasn't really doing it when I was younger. But I'm very interested in it now. I just think you kind of have to create your own things, and especially if you feel like you have something to say or you have a point of view.
How about you, Kevin?
I am married to a true Renaissance woman. My wife's been a prima ballerina. She did 3 Broadway shows. They all won the Tony.
Since the 1600s.
She's a fierce. She's probably the best female electric guitar player I've ever heard.
Is she really?
Yeah. She plays piano. She composes. She writes. She a couple years ago decided she was kind of annoyed with the idea of composing and not being able to fully communicate with the orchestration. So she learned orchestration in a year and a half, and next thing I knew was doing symphonic orchestrations, which, for those who know, it's 75 to 85 pieces. She's just kind of freaky. Yeah. And so she gets bored if she has to do the same thing all the time. And we were doing a show that was a little on the slow side to begin with, and she was a swing and had way too much time on her hands. And we were on the road, and she started bugging me and saying, and I was complaining because I'd just done a big role, and this role was more of an ensemble show. And I sort of was saying, well, here I am at the peak of my powers, and I can't, do anything I could do would be given to a celebrity. And she said, well, and we came home and we were kvetching, and Yentl was on. So here my wife, and God bless her, she was like, that's what I mean. Someone should write something like that for you. And I'm like, honey, it's Michelle Legrand, it's Barbara Streisand. Ain't nobody going to write anything like that for me, And she said, well, I will. I just don't know how to do it. And I said, well, I know how to do it. But and she looked at me and she said, really? Prove it, kind of thing, Show me. So my wife is tenacious. And the next day she was like, come on. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? And I said, well, I've got to do something to get her just off my butt here. She's going to drive me crazy. I know how this is going to be. And she said, give me an idea, give me an idea. And I said, well, let's do something small. Let's just try something small. So we started to write a treatment of a musical version, sorry to say with a straight face, a musical version of The Shining.
Oh.
Gothic chamber, small, right? Scatman Crothers with high notes. And we got far enough down the road that I started thinking, well, wait a minute, before we go anywhere with this, let's make one phone call. And I called my agent, LA, and I said, what would it take to get the rights to adapt that, The Shining? And he said, he made a couple phone calls, and he called back, and he said, okay, here's the deal. If it were a great idea, and you submitted it, it would be taken from you and given to a celebrity writer. Okay? And but they consider this one of the jewels in their crown, so you can't have the rights to it at all. But now, having suggested it, they'll probably look for someone else to write it. So I thought, okay, this is why writers start with things in the public domain. So then my wife, not giving up easily, said, well, then give me something else. And I suggested what probably all writers start with.
Dude, where's my car?
Dracula or Christmas Carol. So I said Dracula. She said, well, what's the story? Which is the correct artistic question, but I was thinking more literal, and I was like, you don't know the story of Dracula? She was like, no, tell me. And I was like, well, I don't know, really, now that I think about it. I've read the book, but what is the story? What is really the story? And the reason it had been on my mind was something my father had said to me. My father was at the time in the process of leaving this planet, and he said to me the hardest thing was that he kept losing all of his friends because as they were getting older, that was what was really upsetting him. There was that, and that he felt that he was in system because he had cancer, so he kept having to return for these transfusions, and it got to be on my mind what it would be like to outlive everyone you love. What kind of a hell would that be? And that was the first lyric that I wrote for the show, for the piece that we wrote, which was a 7-person Dracula musical. And I knew that my wife could write, because of her ballet background, that she could write something very Russian, very Slavic, and I wanted something dark. So she would say to me, well, what is it you hear in your head? And I would sing, and she would, she'd say, just give me a little of an idea. And I would say, okay, there's a guy, he's in a room, he's got a state trade check. We barely see light. And then we heard this little, and then we get, and she'd go, okay, stop. Pull over. And she'd go in Walmart, get the tape recorder, the 53, okay, go, talk, I'd spew for an hour, and thinking that would, and then the next day, she came in and said, here.
And it was written.
And I'm looking at this handwritten, I said, what is this? She goes, that's the overture. I said, what overture? That's the overture you gave me.
And you share writing credit just for doing that?
Exactly. I said,
He's not a fool.
So here's the action. And she said, well, and then I wrote this based on what you said about that, but I didn't finish this lyric, and then we were off and running. And so that came from sort of a desperate desire to write something that no one else could do. We later learned that when you read something so extreme, that other people can't do it, then you have to fix it. But it was really fascinating to go through the process. And then, I realized that I had always wanted to write, but didn't really enjoy it. That I never wrote where it didn't feel like homework. How many people here relate to that? It just felt like an assignment.
That's an amazing moment. An amazing moment where you can't wait to get to the keyboard.
It's
That's
very different than to
astonishing.
Yes,
and then you get there and then you go, ugh, I can't do it. But the moment of like, I've got to open the keyboard.
I think that's why writers, whether it's Russell Baker or whoever, that they pick it, that they have a time. I don't know how you do it, but it's like they have to write a certain amount. Like they have to make a time or make an appointment or somehow structure some kind of writing every day. I mean, I know even Billy Joel said, I play. He said I wrote New York State of Mind in half an hour, but I play 4 hours no matter what. And most days it can be noodling or maybe it's one chord, but I do it. And that's the hard part is that is to do it. I need a little, but we keep changing the form because, like for you, going through the process of taking something that you've now spent a year or two on and you really see filled and you've completed it, now to get it produced, to get it done with a budget of $8, $9, $10, $15, $20 million, what happens to the loss of that connection? We started to look for other ways to experience the same creativity. After writing 2 musicals that were produced, I was halfway through a third one. I thought, I don't know where to go with this. And we sort of made a right-hand turn. And the next project we decided on was I was actually in L.A. with my old college roommate, Alan Weekman. And he was lamenting that every time I came to visit in Pasadena, that when he left, the kids didn't want to hear him read anymore. It's like, I'm a lawyer. I don't do the 17 characters thing. So he said, and there's days when I come home and I've just been working and I don't really feel like reading. And I thought, I wonder how many parents feel that way. So my wife and I wrote a mini musical. It's an audio musical book. It's like 6 songs, and it's 40 minutes long, and it's in 2 acts, and it's called A Frog's Tale, and it's a fully fleshed out miniature musical and I do all the voiceover, and she's written music, and I wrote and we produced it completely. So it's like and so the idea was, we'll have a text for when the parents are interested and energetic enough. Then we'll have a disc for when they're not. And then there's a separate disc that has the songs themselves for in the car. So that's like, and we thought, well, here we can do this. We don't have to worry about getting it produced. We don't have to physically do that unless it, so that's out coming out this month, actually. And there's been a lot of interest because I've been doing a lot of books on tape, and I kept saying, why no music? And they said, it's too expensive, it's too time-consuming, we can't do it. And I said, what if we did it in-house? What if I happened to be, sleeping with a composer, arranger / player, And so and we found so much freedom in that, and again, this is where the technology changes, we can do so much in-house now,
It is astonishing.
4 musicians in Nashville.
And when you just finished filming a television film called Rock the House, and that is for next calendar year? On
right now,
Hallmark.
Yeah, right. It's a Hallmark movie, and right now it's for next year. We have a sneaking suspicion they might move it up, but we don't know. And that was great fun because I got to play guitar and sing rock and roll, and I mean, when you get a chance, how often do you get a chance to do that? I hadn't done it before, and it was one of the most fun things I've ever done. I mean, just playing just playing rock and roll on camera is like, come on, I'm going to pay you to do that? That was a blast. I really had a good time doing that.
So to finish up, so if you guys were to go back, I don't know, 34 years or so,
evil, you'll get yours.
Would you come back here?
I would, yeah.
Would you make the decision to come here again?
Yeah, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, I don't think I would change anything. I mean, it's a tough question to ask, but it's a very easy question to ask. It's a tough question to answer. There are things that I might change, but not much. I'm actually really glad. And a friend of mine once said, the one thing that Duke really gave me that some people in conservatories don't get is just kind of a professional outlook on the world. Is that even though you're not necessarily surrounded by people who are doing exactly what you're doing, you're surrounded by so many high achievers and so many people who are going to be captains of industry and high achieving doctors and lawyers and all that stuff that there's an expectation of professionalism that kind of permeates what it is you do. And I was talking to some of the students today about that, and I said, I think that even though this isn't a conservatory, you're surrounded by so many talented, bright people who are so good at so many different things that when they come to see your show at Branson or wherever it is, they're not expecting junk, and they're not going to be happy with junk. And I think it raises your level just knowing that the people who are watching you are sentient beings, and they get it, and they know when you're terrible, and you don't want to be terrible. And I think that even though you're not necessarily competing for 200 other people for the job, the way you might be at a Carnegie Mellon or something like that, there's still an expectation that you should be good. And I think there is a professional outlook on life, which was very beneficial.
Any questions at all from the crowd before I send these guys on their way?
Not a single question.
Come on. You don't even have to go with the mic. You can just raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and you can just say it. Nothing? Okay, right here. Thanks, Bron.
I have a screenplay which I'm in the process of turning into an actual feature, and that is quite a task. We were quite close to having our financing a couple of years ago, like literally 2 years ago, right when the bottom fell out of the market, and the economy went south, and so we're building that back up. But that's something that's always that I'm always working on. And then, hopefully I'm going to be going back to work on Heroes in another month or two. I have not received the official pickup yet, so I think we will. We're waiting to hear.
I kind of have it the way I like it. I'm working on a musical set for 2011. I don't know if it'll happen out with Lea Salonga, called Allegiance. It's actually George Takei. His family story about the internment camps.
Oh, wow.
And George is involved. Wonderful man, and a wonderful piece, potentially. We've been doing workshops of that for the better part of a year now, and it's really coming along. It's changing.
He has a fascinating story.
Yeah, he's incredible. That's a very interesting piece of history, and a very interesting piece. I'll be doing a revival of Miss Saigon this summer. You know, one of these will be the last time I can get up on that car, but I'm going to take one more shot at it. I'm going back with 3 Phantoms in concert to the Symphony Circuit again this fall, which is great because we're just 3 guys singing.
Who are the other 2?
It's a group of guys, but the originals are me and Craig Schulman and Chris Groendahl. Mark Jacoby also does it, as does Hugh Panaro, as does a few other guys. And we always joke, you know, in the theater, there's an 11 o'clock number, the big number, and in our show, every number is 11 o'clock. So it's always 11 o'clock. We just come out and kill these numbers. It's really fun. It's fun for 3 guys that have always been sort of leading guys to sing together. So we do a lot of trio and duet work. And with this, I tell you, there's, for what it's worth, if you ever get a chance to even stand on the stage when 78 pieces play, it's pretty swell, I got to tell you. It's a rare experience, so that's good. We're going on to our next children's audio musical before we've gotten the first one out there, which is exciting. And I'm also going back to teach one of a couple places, probably more than a couple of places. I've started teaching at Rollins College this year, which has a kind of different, it's funny, it's got a different experience of the Duke thing. How many, is it 15 majors here? They've got 80 theater majors there and 1,700 students. But it's a great school because it's 9-to-1 student-faculty ratio, and I get to teach, English comp, which is cool. You know, it's like I get to do that too. So a good challenge and exciting, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that.